I never really believed in anything out of the ordinary, not until it happened to me, and even now, I still try to find a logical explanation. This whole thing still bothers me years later, and I still think about it more than I probably should. It was back in 2019. I was 24 at the time, living in this small town called Oak Haven, just a little speck on the map out in the middle of nowhere. I had moved there a couple of years earlier after college, mostly because my parents lived about 2 hours away and I found a decent job at the local library. It was pretty quiet work, mostly shelving books, helping people with the computers, that kind of thing. My routine was pretty set in stone: wake up, go to work, come home, cook dinner, maybe watch some TV, and then bed. It was a good life, comfortable, nothing really exciting ever happened. I was perfectly fine with that. Excitement usually means trouble, right? Oak Haven itself was one of those places where everybody knew everybody, or at least they knew your car. There was one main street, a grocery store, a diner, and a hardware store. Not much else. The houses were mostly older, built in the 50s or 60s, some even earlier. I rented a small place, a 2-bedroom bungalow on Elm Street. Nothing fancy, but it had a nice big yard and was pretty affordable. One Saturday, a few months before everything got weird, I saw a sign for an estate sale just a few blocks from my house. I always liked poking around estate sales. You never know what you might find. Sometimes there are some real treasures, or at least some interesting old junk. This one was for a Mr. Peterson, an older gentleman who had recently passed away. I knew him vaguely from the library. He used to come in pretty regularly to read the newspapers. A quiet man, always wore a tweed jacket, even in the summer. His house was a typical older Oak Haven home, a small ranch-style place with a well-tended garden, the kind with a picket fence around it that had seen better days. It was packed with stuff, the usual mix of furniture, old dishes, clothes, books. I spent about an hour just wandering through the rooms, picking up little odds and ends. I found a couple of interesting old novels and a ceramic mug I liked. Then, upstairs in what I guessed was a study or office, I saw it. An old mechanical typewriter. It was a Royal Standard, dark green, really heavy. It looked like it had been sitting there untouched for decades. I just liked the way it looked. I figured it would make a nice decorative piece for my living room. Maybe I'd put it on an antique end table I had. It was $50, which seemed like a fair price for something so solid and unique. I bought it, along with my other finds, and hauled everything back to my place. I put the typewriter on an old wooden desk I kept in the spare bedroom, which I used for an office. It felt good to have something tangible and old in the house. Later that week, I was cleaning up a bit, and I noticed there was a piece of paper actually still loaded in the typewriter. It was old, yellowed at the edges. I pulled it out and there was nothing on it, just a blank sheet. I thought, that's kind of neat, left in there all this time. Instead of throwing it away, I just decided to leave it in there. I even advanced it a few lines, just to see if the carriage worked. It did. Then I forgot about it and went on with my usual routine. Life went on. Weeks passed. The typewriter just sat there, a silent, heavy presence in my spare room. I didn't even touch it. One evening I was feeling a bit restless. It was a Tuesday, a slow night at the library. I came home, ate dinner, and just felt like doing something different. I remembered the typewriter. I thought it might be kind of fun to try typing on it, just for the novelty. It seemed like a quaint, old-fashioned thing to do. I went into the spare room. The room was dark, except for the light from the hallway spilling in. The typewriter was still there, of course. I reached for the lamp on the desk, flipped the switch. The room brightened. I glanced at the typewriter, and that's when I saw it. There was a single line of text typed across the middle of the paper. "She is still in the house." I just stared at it. My first thought was that I must have done it. Maybe I had been messing around with it that first day and just forgot. But then I remembered specifically pulling out the blank sheet, examining it, and putting it back blank, and I hadn't touched it since. Plus, I don't just randomly type sentences like that. It wasn't even in my normal typing style. The letters were a little shaky, uneven. I stood there for a good minute, just trying to process it. My mind immediately went to a logical explanation. Had a friend been over? No, I lived alone, and I hadn't had anyone over in weeks anyway. Had someone broken in? I quickly checked the front door, the back door, all the windows. Everything was locked, no signs of forced entry. Nothing out of place in the living room, kitchen, or my bedroom. My heart was starting to beat a little faster, but I was still trying to be rational. Maybe the paper was already typed on when I got it and I just didn't notice. But no, I remembered taking it out. It was a blank, yellowed sheet. I knew it was. The thought of it always being there and me just missing it, it just felt wrong. I mean, I'm pretty observant. I'm a librarian after all, you have to be detail-oriented in that job. Also, was it even the same paper? I picked the sheet out, examining the edges, the texture. It seemed like the same old, yellowed paper. I tried to replicate the typing. I sat down, rolled the carriage back, and tried to type the same sentence. My fingers felt clumsy on the old keys. It was hard to get an even stroke. The machine was stiff. It really did feel like it had been sitting for decades. I certainly couldn't make it look exactly like the words already on the page. I typed a few random letters, some words. The typing was crisp, clear, and uniform, unlike the slightly wobbly nature of the previous line. It just didn't match. I even typed, "She is still in the house," exactly like that, and it looked a bit different, more precise than the line already there. It was unsettling. I ended up pulling the paper out and putting it in a plastic sleeve. I know it sounds crazy holding on to it, but I just couldn't bring myself to throw it away. I left the typewriter loaded with a fresh, blank sheet just to see what would happen. I convinced myself that maybe I was just tired, maybe I was misremembering things, maybe it was a weird trick of the light. I mean, my brain was trying to find any reason other than the one that was starting to creep into the back of my mind. The next day, nothing was on the paper, or the day after that. I checked every morning, almost obsessively. My skepticism started to creep back in. I told myself it must have been a trick of my own memory, a weird lapse. I even considered carbon paper. Maybe there was carbon paper and I just removed it. But then, why just one line? And why that line? It still didn't sit right. Then, about a week later, I saw something in the local Oak Haven Chronicle, the small town newspaper. It was a short article buried on page 3. It said that the Oak Haven police had begun excavating the garden of the late Mr. Peterson, the man whose estate sale I had bought the typewriter from. My stomach dropped. The article mentioned that the police were acting on an anonymous tip. It brought up an old missing persons case from 1974 involving Mr. Fierst, Peterson's wife, a woman named Eleanor Peterson. The official story at the time was that she had just left him, packed her bags, and vanished one day without a trace. Her family had always been suspicious, but there was never any real evidence. Mr. Peterson had never remarried, lived alone all these years in that same house. She is still in the house. It suddenly clicked into place with a horrifying intensity. The one line typed on the old paper, the paper that had been sitting in his typewriter in his house for decades. I felt a cold dread wash over me. This wasn't a coincidence. It couldn't be, not with that specific wording and the discovery of the excavation. My mind, which usually ran on logic and reason, was struggling to keep up. I didn't believe in ghosts or spirits or anything supernatural. I just didn't. But what other explanation was there? I went back to the paper in the plastic sleeve. I reread the sentence, tracing the slightly wobbly letters with my finger. It was exactly what the newspaper was talking about. This was too specific to be a random phrase. I started doing some research online, looking up old Oak Haven news articles. It was harder than I thought. A lot of old local news wasn't digitized. But I found a few snippets about Eleanor Peterson. She was 37 when she disappeared. No children. She worked as a bookkeeper. Descriptions varied, but she sounded like a perfectly ordinary woman. The police investigation back then had been brief, inconclusive. It was assumed she had just left town, perhaps for a new life. I even drove past the Peterson house. The police tape was up, bright yellow against the green lawn. There was a small tent over a section of the garden, shielding the excavation from view. A police cruiser was parked out front. It looked exactly like something out of a crime show. The unsettling feeling grew. I still had the typewriter. It was still in my spare room, sitting there, quiet. I started to wonder if I should get rid of it. But then, if I did, would I ever know what happened? A part of me, the logical part, still wanted an explanation. The skeptical part wanted to prove it was all some kind of bizarre coincidence or a misunderstanding. I decided not to get rid of it. I wouldn't leave paper in it overnight though. I wasn't gonna tempt fate, but I had a weird, reluctant curiosity. I mean, if there was some kind of, I don't know, ethereal presence trying to communicate, this was a pretty direct way to do it. A few days later, the news broke. They had found human remains in the garden. The Oak Haven Chronicle had a much larger article this time, front page news. They didn't confirm it was Eleanor Peterson yet, but the implication was clear. They mentioned that the remains were skeletal, consistent with someone who had been buried for decades. I felt sick to my stomach. This was real. This wasn't a weird dream or a prank. A 45-year-old cold case had just been blown wide open, and I somehow had a piece of it, a very strange piece. I spent the next few weeks feeling incredibly on edge. Every creak of my old house, every shadow made me jump. I found myself looking at the typewriter, wondering if it was some kind of conduit. It was a ridiculous thought, I knew, but how else do you explain it? I mean, I'm a rational person, but I just couldn't square this with anything I understood about the world. I didn't tell anyone about the typewriter. Who would believe me? They'd think I was crazy. I'd sound like some kind of coat talking about ghost typewriters. My parents, my friends, they're all very pragmatic people. They'd just tell me it was a coincidence or I was making things up, and I didn't want to be dismissed. The police eventually confirmed the remains were indeed Eleanor Peterson. Mr. Peterson, the quiet man from the library, was posthumously implicated. The police said the anonymous tip mentioned that his wife was buried in the garden, and it was a direct match to where they found the remains. They were still investigating the source of the tip. My mind kept going back to that message. She is still in the house. It wasn't a message implying she was buried under the house or outside the house. It specifically said in the house. I wondered if she had been kept inside for a while, or if her spirit or something was still tethered to the house. I mean, I don't even like using those words, spirit, tethered. It sounds like something out of a movie, but I had no other words to explain it. I still have the typewriter. It's sitting in my closet now, covered with a dust cloth. I couldn't bring myself to throw it away, sell it, or even donate it. It felt wrong. It felt like it held something, and I couldn't leave it out in the open anymore. I didn't want to see it, but I didn't want it completely out of my life either. Maybe because it was a tangible link to something I couldn't understand. I moved out of that house on Elm Street about a year later. Not directly because of the typewriter, but it definitely added to the general unease. The town felt different after the Peterson case. It lost some of its quiet innocence. The whispers, the way people looked at that house, it was all too much. I found a new job in a bigger town about an hour away, a fresh start. But still, every now and then, especially when I'm alone in my apartment late at night, I think about that old green Royal Standard typewriter. I think about the paper, left in the machine for nearly 50 years, and then that one line appearing. It was just a single line, but it blew apart everything I thought I knew about the world, and it still bothers me to this day. I still don't have an explanation, and I doubt I ever will.